Hi guys, so in this video we're going to go through how to wet sand and polish clear coat. We're going to go through all the stages that you need to do, how to do them, and also all the tools, materials and products that are best to get that glassy finish. So the first and most important bit is the 3M Microfine Wet and Dry. Now I've got this in a 1500 grade. You can get other brands, but I find they're a lot harsher even in the 1500. We've got a spray bottle which has just got plain water in it. We haven't got any soap or anything like that in it. A couple of decent, nice, soft microfiber cloths. I buy mine by the pack. The P3000 3M Trizac discs. These really help that polish finish, stopping that from dyeing back. Now we're using a 150mm electric polisher, and I've also got the 75mm air polisher, which is great for getting inside door jambs and those little hard to reach areas that your big polisher just won't get into. Now for the compound itself, we're using the G3 Premium just because it's a really easy one. You can use that for the compound and the polish. And we've got new compounding waffle heads and also new polishing waffle sponges. And then for double checking, just to make it a bit of a foolproof way of double checking that this isn't going to dye back, I always keep some panel wipe and a microfiber for panel wipe, but we'll get into that and I'll show you that soon as to what we're actually doing with that. So the first stage of this really is going to be getting the 1500, and we're going to be getting going on this panel, and we're going to wet flat the top of the wing. Now the rest of the car's already been done, and this section here is the last bit that we've got to do. The lower section of the wing has already been wet flat but hasn't been Trizac or anything. So first thing we're going to do is this microfiber here is just damp, so we're going to run that over just to make sure there's no dust or any grit on the panel, so it's nice and clean before we start wet flatting. Because if you don't and you get a bit of grit underneath that wet flat, you're going to scratch the surface of that lacquer. And worst case scenario is you can scratch it that bad, actually you won't be able to get it out, and you're going to have to end up repainting it. So firstly, all we're going to do, dampen down the panel nicely, and then we're going to start wet flatting all this. Now you'll see when you're wet flatting, if you dry it off after a few strokes with the wet flat, that some of it will be glossy and some of it won't. Now the glossy section is basically where your orange peel still sits. So if you're doing a job like this and you want to completely remove the orange peel, then we want to wet flat this nice and even all over. And when we dry this down, which I shall show you in a minute, if the whole panel is matte and there's no glossy bit showing through, then we know we've removed all that orange peel, and if we polish this correctly and we've wet flat it correctly, that we're going to end up with a real nice glass finish to it. Now yes, it's not off the gun, it's a polished finish, but if you do this correctly and you follow the steps that I use here, then I found that you will not get this dyeing back. There is a little trick in the middle of this to actually test whether your panel will dye back or not. So we're going across all this with the 1500. Now you could use 2000, you can use all sorts in the wet flat range. Now I prefer the 3M Microfine wet and dries, because if I went for another brand of wet and dry in a 1500, because it's not the Microfine grit, you tend to find that it actually scratches a lot harsher than this does as a 1500. And you might think, right, well the 3M Microfine wet and dry is £20–30 a pack, and this other brand that my supplier's got is £15 a pack. Believe me, it's worth spending the extra few quid and getting 3M. One thing, 3M is pricey. I think everybody in the trade knows it, but the problem is, you know, you're getting what you pay for. It's on a job like this, and when you're trying to wet flat like this, it's worth spending that extra money. You know, you've put all that effort into the prep and into the repairs, into getting it cleaned down in the booth. if you're going to wet, flat and polish it, then you might as well wet, flat and polish it the right way and end up with something that's going to look great and it's going to last. Now, this has got MS Clear on it, and it's also anti-scratch, which is why I always use 1500, because sometimes anti-scratch clears can be a bit of a pain in the arse to wet, flat and polish. And whether it's HS or MS, really makes no difference. I'll use a 1500 and then a 3000 Trizac, and I end up with no issues. So you can see I've wet flat all this panel, I've gone over everything nice and even, and as far as, you know, in my head I'm thinking, right, you know, I don't think I've missed anything, but we'll check all that in a minute. Now, edges wise, you shouldn't go through on your edges as long as you're careful. The trick is, like here, I'm going right along that edge, but I'm not putting pressure on the actual panel edge. I'm just putting pressure on the very edge of the wet and dry, so that I can wet flat that right up to the edge, but not actually wet flat that edge or a swage line or anything like that. Because obviously the one thing you don't want to do is end up taking a little bit too much off and getting rub throughs. So with the top of this wing, I think I've pretty much wet flat that and I'm happy with where it's up to. So now here's the test. We're going to wipe the panel down, give it all a good clean down, and then we're going to get some air and just blow the air across it to dry that off quickly. Now you'll notice that I've left this bagged up while I'm wet flatting this, because wet flat sometimes can be messy, but if you leave your car bagged up, wet flat it, polish it, the compound can't go anywhere but on the paint and on the paper. And then you give this a good wipe down with a damp cloth after, take your paper off, you've got a perfectly polished shell and none of the mess is in the car or in places that you can't get it. So currently that's looking pretty nice. Now there's a little bit of a section where I can see there's a little bit of a patch of peel left just in the edge of the wing there, and also at the front you'll see it in a second where there's a dirt nib that's still a little bit high that hasn't been caught when we've wet flat it. So those are the areas now that we're just going to go back and touch up, just to make sure that we have that fully matte finish across the whole panel and it's all nice and smooth and it's all even. Because what you don't want is a bit of peel in one section and a really smooth flat bit in another section, because when it's polished, you know, the front half of your wing is going to look peely and the back half of your wing is going to look glassy, and that's definitely one thing that when you're finished with a job you don't want. So what we're going to do now is just to triple check again and to make sure we're nice and clean and dry, is we're going to airline this off again, dry it all down and make sure we've got the look at this point that we want, which is basically 100% matte, no orange peel anywhere that can be seen. Okay, so we've got all that now wet and dried down nicely with the 1500. Now I've got the 3M Trizac on the air sander, and I've also got an interface pad on it which will stop you putting too much pressure on any of these edges on this panel. Now this is one of the most important and one of the most overlooked parts of this when you Trizac it. I know so many people that get a Trizac disc on, give it a really fast whip over a panel and away they go and they think that's enough. Take your time. You spent a lot of time prepping this, you spent a lot of time painting it, so take your time now and do this the right way. So what we've done is we've wet the Trizac disc and we've wet all the car down, and we're going to go over this, and we're not going to give it a quick go over, we're going to give this a nice, slow, even, thorough go over. Now if you Trizac this correctly, what you will end up with is all these areas that we Trizac now will actually end up a nice satin finish already, and rather than the way they looked before, you would see the lines where with wet and dry, and you can see the marks where the 1500's been. When you Trizac this now, this should be a really nice even satin finish all over the wing. Now it's not something that you should rush, because this is one of the biggest things that will stop your panels dying back when you've compounded and polished them, because these are going to take those 1500 or 2000 marks or 2500 marks or whatever it is you use to wet and dry with. These will take them and make these a really fine 3000, which should effortlessly polish back up with a compound. So as we go through, we're going to do the same again. We're going to keep this panel really nice and wet, keep your disc nice and wet, because what you don't want obviously is this drying up. You want that lubricant on the panel. It's going to help the disc to cut, and it's also going to help to keep this panel really nice and clean while we're doing it. So you'll notice that I'm not being careful about my edges or anything. We're going over all the edges, we're getting in all the gaps. Now that interface pad's the key there, because it's a soft interface pad. You know, you're not actually putting that much pressure on, you're not digging anything in, so you're just floating over, and you're not putting too much pressure on this Trizac either. You know, you just want enough pressure basically to keep it on the panel. You don't want to be really forcing it onto the panel, because that's when you're going to start, you know, really getting into them grooves and into them edges and causing trouble with, you know, potential of rub throughs and stuff. Personally, I find it hard to get a rub through when you're wet flatting and Trizacking and polishing. I know some people don't, I know some people get it a lot, but it's not something that I have much of an issue with. Just really because I just take my time. You know, you spend a lot of time and you take a lot of time painting these cars, you know, and prepping them, and you spend a lot of time cleaning stuff to make sure that they come out nice. So, you know, if you're going to do a full wet flat and polish, just take it nice and slow, take your time, keep your panels nice and wet. You know, you might as well, because at the end of the day, the one thing that you don't want is your customers to come back to you a month down the road after having his car washed saying, oh, this panel looks dull in places. So take your time, do the job properly. You know, it doesn't take a lot of effort. You know, it might take you an extra few minutes, but just sit down, chill out, put the radio on with some tunes in the background, and it's easy enough to do. Right, so we're on to the polishing stage now. So we've got a compounding head on the electric polisher, we've got a polish and everything ready, and at this point I've set up some lights behind me so you guys can see a little bit better. Now, as you can see there, that has already got that nice satin look to it. That's because we've Trizacked it the correct way. You shouldn't be able to see any of the 1500 scratches at this point. And as you see there, always make sure you open your polish bottle, otherwise you look like a plonker on YouTube. So this is a brand new compounding head, and we're using the G3 Premium paste. So to start off with, I'm going to put a bit more than I usually would on this compounding head, because it's a brand new compounding head. We're going to wipe it around the panel a bit, and then we're going to get straight into compounding this panel up. Now, as you can see there, that already looks amazingly shiny and glossy. It doesn't take much with a 3000 Trizac to compound it back up if you Trizac it in the correct way. Now, as far as polishing goes, outside of this shop, I've done quite a bit of this. And the one thing you want to make sure that you do is, one, always have your polisher so the leading rotating edge is going off the panel. That way you're going to stop the potential of rub throughs, because the polisher is not grinding heavily and putting a lot of heat and a lot of pressure on those panel edges. The second thing is, don't rush it. Nice and slow, nice and even, and look where the compounding head is touching the panel. If you've got your compounding head on an angle and you're rushing it across, then you probably end up missing actually touching most of the surface of the wing. So just take it slow, do it nice and even, and you should end up with a nice even finish. Now, at this point, this looks really nice. It looks 100% glossed. So this is where the foolproof trick comes in. If this clears fully cured and you're polishing this up at the right time, then you shouldn't have a problem. So here is the little foolproof trick. Get some panel wipe or solvent wipe on a microfiber cloth, and then give this panel a good scrub, because a lot of people don't know, but some of the compounds that we use have actually got fillers and gloss enhancers in them, which almost gives you a fake look to your polished panel. So if you use some solvent wipe or panel wipe, this is just straight panel wipe like I use in the booth, and go over that panel, as you can see in a second, you can see it's got hologram marks, and it doesn't look as gloss as it did a second ago. So it still needs a little bit more. Now, that is the point where a month down the line after your customer's got his car back, he's been to the car wash, he's had it washed, all those gloss enhancers and everything that they put into them polishers has then been washed off by some guy spraying TFR upside of his car. And that's the point where that guy's going to be then coming back to you and saying, hey, this panel you painted looks dull. So the trick to him, I find, some panel wipe on a cloth, give your panel a good wipe over. You know, you don't need to scrub it really hard or anything like that. Just give it a good wipe over. Get rid of anything that's artificial off that panel. So, you know, the polish itself, any gloss that's left, etc. And it will leave you then a true look to your paint. Whatever you're looking at then is purely just your polished paint. You're not looking at any artificial waxes or fillers or anything like that. So I find that is a really good way to triple check your panel. Now, if you polish it again and you wipe it off with your panel wipe and it still looks exactly the same, i.e. it still looks 100% polished, no hologram marks, no swirl marks or anything like that, for me, that panel is good to go. That panel's not going to die back because that is the polished finish of the paint itself that you're looking at. So that's my little foolproof trick, if you will, to the polishing, well, the compounding side. Now, once you've compounded it all with your hard head, this is the great thing about the G3 Premium, is that you can then just pop your compounding head straight off, put on your soft polishing foam. Again, this is a brand new head, so we're going to put a little bit of the compound onto this foam just to prime the foam up to make sure we're not using it dry, like so. And then without wiping off the excess compound that's on the panel, I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to go straight over with the polishing head then and give this a real nice, same again, nice, slow, even, gentle polish up. So if there is any hologram marks or swirl marks or anything on there now, this nice soft polishing head is going to get rid of those completely. Now, both of these heads that I've got here, I think these are about £3.50, £4 each, from gtair.co.uk. I will put the link in the description below because they're a lot cheaper than the Farecla or the 3M versions, and I have to say they did an absolutely cracking job on this car for something that was, what, a third of the price of a Farecla polishing head and compounding head. Couldn't fault them at all. They really did do a good job. So I'll leave you the link in the description below to the compounding and polishing head that I'm using. Right guys, so that is my little how-to on how to wet sand and polish Clearcoat. Hope you found that informative, and hope it's got everything that you needed to know in there. If there's anything more you want to know, just drop us a comment in the box below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and I'll see you again soon guys.